No one is born guilty, and no one is born a victim. We are all fully equipped to deal with whatever life puts on our way. Even those born with disabilities, whether it's physical or mental, struggles, pain, suffering, disappointment is what each of us experience at any stage of our lives. It is what keeps us humble and allows us to appreciate and live for the better and more positive aspects of life. So in this last installment on the topic of abuse, we will focus on the effects it has on its victims in relation to crime and also people in general. I also want to speak about ways to be more than just a survivor of abuse, to be a conqueror by using those experiences to your own advantages. Good day to everybody and welcome back to my channel here at Buga Siswe, where we talk real talk about real life issues. Special shout out to my president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, and I greet each and every one of you that has tuned in. I will now use part of my own life experience as a backdrop for the purpose of this discussion, because I feel essentially this is a platform that depicts my observations and reasonings with regards to the topics at hand. Of course, we each have our own views on different issues or subjects, so with that said, please keep in mind that I mean no disrespect, and I value the views of each and every individual, no matter how controversial it may be. Also, I wish to acknowledge and commend each and every single parent for raising their kids in the best way that they know how. Through my narrative, I strive only to bring some light on issues that are usually shrouded in darkness and secrecy. Somewhere between the ages of 2 and 4 years old, I was left with my grandmother in a small town of Paarl in the Western Cape. A town with a rich and proud history of colonialism. Hottentot and Dutch architecture remain some of their main attractions up until today. My mom, as a single parent, had to live in the city of Cape Town, where she worked for the old railway system that was known as Spoorweg at that time. Me and my eldest sister, who was also my only sister at that time, we only saw our mother occasionally, on the few times when she came to drop off support money to my grandmother. My grandmother, who was firmly and thoroughly brainwashed by the so-called missionaries of that time, was a staunch believer and a follower of the Dutch Reformed Church. There was hardly ever a day that passed by without a practice or an event honoring this movement. And it was during such an event that my life took a turn for the worst. It was a sendeling or missionary event where they all came together from different parts of the province and they met in one place to spread their message and to recruit or find the lost sheep. The venue of this event was in some small farm-like area called Springbok on the outskirts of the province in the Western Cape. Everybody traveled in buses, and from where we stayed it was about a 5-hour drive to get there. When we left to go back home, we arrived back in Paarl around 2 in the morning. So because me and my grandmother, our family, we didn't stay far from where the priest lived. It was agreed that we would spend the night there and then we would leave in the morning. So it was quite overcrowded, of course, and everybody had to share sleeping spaces. I was teamed up with a blind deacon of the church, of whom I was very fond at the time, and I considered him something like a grandfather figure. I woke up in the middle of the night with this deacon molesting me, touching me in a way that I felt utterly uncomfortable with. He tried sticking his tongue in my mouth, and when he found me resisting to this, he drew me closer into his embrace. And that's when I felt his manhood sticking into my back like a piece of rock. Something in my 4-year-old brain told me to fight him off and run, which is exactly what I did. Even in the dark, I located my grandma where she was also sharing with someone, and I jumped in behind her back, shivering until the morning light. I avoided the guy like a plague, and I was the first one out the door when the time came for us to leave. My grandmother found me sitting on the stoop waiting for them, and as soon as she opened the door and went inside, I told her what had happened. At first, she started shouting at me and berating me for making up stories and for telling lies. But when she saw that I didn't budge and that I had started crying, she started praying. It was a few days later when the priest and his son came to visit our home, when the subject was finally breached. The priest, declared that too much time had already elapsed and that I should have spoken sooner. I should have spoken sooner. And according to him, since no harm was done, the police would not be involved. He suggested that my grandmother took better care of me and that I should spend less time being alone with the deacon who had molested me. And that was the end of the story, for them anyway. Well, if you've watched my previous video, then you would know that before this incident, before this happening, I had already experienced abuse from other people. So by the time that this happened, I was already well on my way to becoming a hardened survivor of abuse. At that tender age, all I knew was that I hated adults, that life was cruel, and that the church was a farce where self-righteous and hypocritical fools thrived. So this incident signaled a series of events that detrimentally changed the course of my life. Before this happened, I was the kind of child who always sought out quiet places where I could be by myself and satisfy my curiosity as to the mysteries of nature. Like, for instance, in poor neighborhoods, which is where my gran lived, children were allowed to roam the streets freely, playing in groups of 20 and more. And oftentimes, I would escape these groups and find my way to the nearby river where I would spend blissful hours observing tadpoles, dragonflies, river fish, and stones. And on more than one occasion, a family member was sent to search for me and take me back home. However, after this incident, events in my life transpired in such a way that I felt a need to broaden my horizons. At one stage, I was picked up from a train station 200 kilometers away from where we lived in Paarl. And the police officers who picked me up at the station handed me over to social workers. The running away got so out of hand that I was declared a problem child by the age of 7, when I was then ordered through a verdict reached at a children's court to be placed in a state institution for naughty children. Now, I've chosen to refer to this specific incident because I don't think as parents and caregivers that we realize the far-reaching detrimental impact that abuse have on our children. Like, for instance, in many so-called colored households, children are taught to swear, to use profane language from a very early age, in the belief that they will outgrow it. There are so many contradictions to this. And I feel personally that it is just an excuse for the elders around that child to not curb their cursive vocabulary. I also feel that exposing a child to any form of abuse, from making empty promises, to screaming, to beating, any form of abuse is destructive and injurious towards that child's intellectual and psychological development. According to statistics in South Africa, the most dominant age group of people who is committing crime at the moment in our country are those between the ages of 25 and 34. And further studies also show that the people most likely to commit violent crimes are between the ages of 18 and 24, which is our youth. So, where do you think these young adults learn these destructive behaviors from? Can we really still sit and blame outside forces or the government for the state of affairs? In a country where we are taught to celebrate and to love our oppressors, through the utterly misleading history that we are subjected to in schools, by learning how Jan van Riebeeck came and civilized our people through trade and foreign religion, instead of the slave master that he was, by establishing the first slave colony in South Africa. A school system where kids are taught what a great guy Christopher Columbus was, when in fact he was one of the most brutal slave traders in history. What then, I ask, do we expect from the youth of today? A generation born into a so-called democratically free and civilized country that screams hypocrisy and contradictions at every level of society. And for me, the cherry on top of it all is that we subject our youth to these oppositive contradictions at a time when, at the touch of a button, they can find the truth for themselves. Because they are indeed and undeniably the generation of the technologically advanced age. Paired with the subtle abuses that they suffer on a daily basis at home, it definitely makes for an explosive combination. So how do we even begin to deal with this calamity and the debilitative state that we find ourselves in, with regards to the abuse that we all suffer in one form or another on a daily basis? Well, again, speaking from my own personal experience, I believe that if you want to be victorious over any situation in your life, then you need to consciously apply all of your mental and physical faculties towards that plight. Like, for instance, the very negative impact that whole childhood experience had on my life. As a child, being surrounded by the adults that has surrounded me at that time, I had no other idea or inclination as to how to deal with the situation without destroying my own person. It was only through morose experience and time that I learned to own that event and to not have it control me to my detriment. I learned that I could be a much stronger person characteristically through it, by identifying and standing up against individuals that betrayed any of those abusive tendencies towards me and towards others. I have reached a point where I no longer feel ashamed or dirty when I speak about it. Of course, I do mourn the loss of the innocence of the little girl that I was, but I've accepted and made peace with the fact that we each have our own cross to bear in life. It is up to us whether we want to recognize that cross as a representation of our suffering, or as a talisman with which to measure our personal growth. So, how is this experience relevant to all the abuse suffered by others? And how can this change our current narrative on abuse? Well, for me, the relevance lies in the fact that each person suffering from some form of abuse or the other need to firstly recognize that you are being abused. Many times, victims of abuse suffer in silence. And more often than not, it is because they don't want to admit to the fact that to themselves that they are being abused. Making all kinds of excuses for what is happening to them, to the point where they even blame themselves and feel they deserve whatever treatment they are getting from their abusers. Then secondly, you need to stand up to that abuse by finding ways to clamp down on it without destroying yourself or others. For me, what I found most useful and effective was to speak to people who genuinely cared about my well-being, and also to believe in a greater purpose for my life. In my case, in the form of my Heavenly Father called Jah Rastafari. Salvation for each of us, of course, will come in different forms or beings. The important thing is that you find something or someone to believe in, from where you can draw strength when you feel down and out. This alone is a topic I feel that needs an installment all on its own. Generally speaking, though, I also feel it is important to mention, again, the destructive history that we share as a nation. For us to go forward, we need to come clean about what really transpired and what the inevitable results would be of forced labor and segregation. Healing from something so momentous is not going to happen overnight. More and more, I come across Africans lamenting, complaining about our situation, and then saying how they would rather prefer the old ways, meaning the days of apartheid, where according to them, there was law, order, respect, and most importantly, service delivery. I cannot emphasize enough how very disturbing I find this. I mean, yes, we all hunger for some form of normalcy, respect and dignity of our person. But to suggest that the answer lies in the law of apartheid is just not acceptable to me. Because firstly, those precepts were upheld through intimidation, violence, and oppression. And then secondly, my forefathers and my ancestors did not sacrifice their lives for me to turn around and support the pure evil for which they were compelled to lay down their lives so that we could have a better future. What we are experiencing now in terms of the high levels of crime and lack of service delivery is only but the results of the prolonged rule of an oppressive system. It is what was foreseen by me and many other like-minded people, including Chris Hani, who was assassinated, when we were told by Mandela and de Klerk to sit and sing Kumbaya around the campfire without delivering what we as a people were promised in terms of owning land and having our financial freedom. Imagine even being told that you are superior to someone simply through birth or the color of your skin, only to suddenly find yourself in a position where that someone now rules you. Can you imagine the trauma that that person has to go through? Can you imagine the impact such a shift has on someone's mental state? Even for the oppressed to become the oppressor, which is what we are currently experiencing in our country. The far-reaching negative impact it has no limit. No, my people, no. My plight is not just for black or just white. My plight is not just for rich or just for poor. My plight in this is not just for the free or the bound. My plight is for each and every one of us to be victorious over the abuses we suffer going through this walk of life. If we want things to change, then we need to look in the mirror. If you want to stop abuse, look in the mirror and see the precious person staring back at you. Realize your own worth and take control back. If you want a reduction in crime, then stop ill-treating your children and instill in them virtues of integrity, honesty, and respect towards all living things. If you want us as a society to go forward in a progressive way, then start telling the youth the truth about where they come from, what was wrong with it, and ways of making it right. I do realize that the issue of abuse is not something that can be compressed into merely 3 installments, and that there are still many aspects of it that I haven't touched on. However, through this narrative, I hope to have at least planted a seed that will bring forth fruit of empowerment, enlightenment, and most importantly, victory over situations of despair and hopelessness. It has been a real pleasure for me to be able to put all of this together for you guys. I hope that it has been received in the manner by which it was intended. I look forward to seeing you in my next installment, and until then, please do take care. Also, I want to just encourage all of you to be on the lookout for red flags that may signal abuse in the lives of your loved ones. Sometimes these things happen right under our noses, and we only realize what is happening when the damage had already been done. So stay alert and be a friend to someone in need, even if it's just in the form of lending an ear or offering a shoulder to cry on. God bless.